The main thing that you want to develop in life is the ability to detect them before you get involved with them. Because the way toxic people have learned, they've learned strategies since they were 6 or 7 years old of how to get power. And they embroil you in dramas. They get into your emotions, right? They entangle themselves in your life. They don't come at you saying, I'm toxic, I'm a narcissist, get away from me. They know how to appear charming. They know how to be interested in you. They know how to be moderately pleasing, etc. They can even be charismatic. You get involved with them, and then it starts to come out, and it's too late because you're emotionally entangled with them. They've got their roots inside of you, and you're sucked into their dramas, and it's really hard to get out, particularly in an intimate relationship. That's the worst of all. The best thing you want to develop in life is the radar to detect them before you get involved with them. You have to see your circumstances for what they are. In military terms, they call it situational awareness. You're very aware, crystal clear about who you are, about who other people are, about what the world is like. So that's the attitude that you want to craft for yourself in this world. And it's very difficult. As you've been saying very eloquently, the cards are stacked against you. Because of how we're wired. Our brains developed 200,000 years ago in circumstances that certainly aren't the way things are now. So there's kind of a gap there between how we're wired to think and what's going on in the 21st century. And B, we're dealing with technology that's making things harder. So your goal in life is to become more realistic, to be able to step back and look at things as they are. And how do you get there is the question. So first you have to see that as your goal, and it has to be important to you, and it has to be something that you want. And it's not just something that's cold and dry and scientific.
Really fast, why is that the right goal?
Why is that the right goal?
Yeah, to see, I agree with you. I just want to see how you explain it to people, why it matters to see the world the way that it actually is.
Well, okay, imagine it this way. So there's yourself. Everything begins with you, right? You're filled with all kinds of illusions about who you are, about what you're good at, what you're bad at, what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are. If you're able to see inside of yourself with a degree of realism, you'll be able to understand, this is what I was destined to be in life. This is what I call my life's task. This is the career that fits me, that suits me. So if you're able to have that realism, when you're 22 years old, you're not going to suddenly go off on this wrong career path that's going to make you miserable, make you an alcoholic by the time you're 30. You're going to have a degree of direction in life. It's incredibly liberating. It's incredibly powerful to be able to see inside of yourself and know what you were destined for and what makes you, you. Other people wear masks. They smile, but their smile doesn't mean anything. There are toxic people out there. It's not everybody. I don't mean to make you paranoid. Maybe there's like 5% of the world that's truly toxic. Every single human being, I can guarantee you, has had to deal with these toxic people in a way that's painful. And you don't see them, they're very tricky. These are people who've learned to disguise themselves. You're going to get sucked into all these dramas and traumas with these people. It can make your life miserable. Imagine that you had a realistic attitude and you could see through these people. You could catch, before you get involved with them, signs of that they might be one of these types. Another thing that's incredibly liberating, the world that you live in, there's a zeitgeist, there's a spirit of the times, there are trends, there's things that are going on right now in your career, in the world at large. And we're fed with so much bullshit in the media. We have no idea what's really going on. The ability to see, this is where the world is headed. This is where business will be in 2 years. This is where things are going to be. These are the trends. The power to see inside yourself, the power inside to see other people, to see the world. You're Superman if you can do that. If you can have a degree of that, the world is at your feet, basically. So, I don't think there's any counter argument to that where you don't want that kind of realism. And it's not this ugly thing. It's incredibly sexy because it's incredibly powerful, right? So we've now come to the point, you and I, we agree that that's what you want. The person out there is going, yeah, I want that as well. Okay, Robert, that's fine. How do I get there? Aha. Well, you have to be patient. You have to know it's a process. You can't get ahead of yourself. You can't get ahead of your skis. It's going to take day by day by day by day. You have to build it up. You're working against your own nature. You're working against the times. So be patient, be compassionate with yourself, and learn to take these baby steps. And in the book, Daily Laws, I have a lot of different ways of attacking that. The main way of attacking it is learning the ability, as we talked about earlier, to be able to detach yourself from the immediate events going on and to be able to look at yourself with a degree of dispassion and say, this is what I really did, what really happened here. So just a simple example, something kind of doesn't go the way you want it to, which will happen almost every day or every week, with your children, with your spouse, with your boss, wherever. Okay, what is your normal reaction? Every single human, including myself, blame that person. They're not caring. They're not empathetic. They're an asshole. They're narcissistic, blah, blah, blah. Stop it. Stop it right now. Don't do that again. Step back and say, what did I do? Okay, if that person is toxic, why am I involved with them? There's something wrong about me. If that person got reactive and resentful and they had a bad tone of voice, something that I said, maybe there was something in me that was projecting kind of negativity. Maybe my own mood was kind of creating this atmosphere that made them react that way. Look at yourself instead of blaming other people. These are parts of the process. There are many others, but yeah.
Dude, that is so huge. People always, so I have a saying that I like that most people fucking hate, which is everything is my fault. And
I love it.
It's so useful. So fault is a word that gives people, I don't know, emotional distress or something. And so they don't like when I use that phrase. But what I like to remind myself is that if I did something different, I could get a different outcome.
Right.
And that's so powerful to me, to not, by blaming somebody else, by making it their fault, I give away all my power and there's nothing I can do about it. And now I'm sort of a victim of circumstance. But man, when you take 100% ownership and you look at your life and say, my life is an exact reflection of choices that I've made.
Yeah.
Now, if I want it to be different, then I just need only make different choices.
Completely. And one of the things that's like that is if something went wrong, maybe, and I'm to blame, just accept it. Just accept the fact that it happened. Don't try to change it, but just say that this has happened and I'm not going to fight it. And it's just my fate in life. It's okay, right? So the ability to accept things is also taking ownership of them. So if something bad happens and you can't really control it, because let's be honest, there are times that you can't control things. They're just going to happen. Who predicted a pandemic? You can't control that, right? So your first reaction is to get all pissy and go, damn it, why did it happen? Fuck, I'm a victim, blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, that's just going to make you more depressed, more inward, more harder to act in the world. Whereas if you say, okay, I can't control the pandemic. It's a terrible thing, but I'm going to roll with the punches. I'm going to accept the way things are. I'm not going to fight it. This is the way the world is. What can I get out of it? What kind of benefit? Well, maybe I can reassess my career. Maybe before the pandemic happened, I was just headed in this path and I was kind of blind. Maybe I'm not really happy with what I am. I'm not happy with my relationships, with my career. Maybe I need to reassess it. Maybe it's time for me to be alone and read books and study and learn new skills, etc. So the ability to accept things that you can't change and to see some benefit from them is also part of that.
I want to go back to emotions. So we've talked about how emotions are incredibly powerful. I don't think you use this example in the book, but it was certainly along these lines that if you damage the region of somebody's brain that deals with the emotional centers, they can't make decisions, which is absolutely just insane to me.
Yeah.
And you also have a quote in the book, though, that I wrote down that I would like to share with people now. And for clarity's sake, I actually agree with both sides of this. So you've got the side that you talked about where if you damage the emotional centers of somebody's brain, they can't make a decision. And then you also had a quote, and I don't know why the app is crashed that I have the quote in. I can paraphrase it if I can't get this out. Here we go. I think I can get it now. Nope, it's not opening. So the paraphrase of the quote is that emotions are essentially a disease looking for a remedy. And I was like, yes, you can't just believe your emotions, or maybe that's not the right way to think about it, but you can't just take them on board. And because I have this feeling, I'm going to act on it, or it represents truth.
Right.
Help people understand. First, give us that. Like, what do you mean? How is it possible that my emotions aren't necessarily useful or true? And then we'll balance it with the idea of how important emotions actually are.
Well, in a Japanese Zen way, your emotions are truth because you are feeling the way you're feeling. Okay, so that's real, right? But it could stem from a very false source as well. Okay, so let's just go back to that example that I gave earlier of the young boy who felt abandoned by his mother, right? And his whole pattern in his life is to be the one that's doing the abandoning, so he's not abandoning himself. So in the moment that he's with this woman, within this relationship that's been going on, he's starting to feel something's wrong with her. She's bad. She's not right for me. She's gonna, I better leave this relationship, right? He's not reacting on what she's doing. His emotions are not coming from what she could be perfectly fine. She could be totally loving. He's projecting onto her his own emotions. What he feels is genuine. He genuinely feels that something is wrong, but it doesn't come from the truth itself. It comes from some deeper, much deeper pain. So your emotions, you're feeling them, but the source of them, you have no idea what the source is, right? So, you explode at somebody in your office tomorrow because of something, and then you don't realize that in the morning you were already put in a bad mood by something that somebody else said, and that kind of made you prone to like exploding later on in the day. You are seeing that other person that triggered you, but you're not seeing what happened earlier in the day that set the tone for it, that planted the seed for you being triggered, right? So you don't have access to the source of what's really causing your emotions. Now, I'll be honest, you're never going to get true access to the actual source of it because there's something buried very deep inside. Who knows where it came from? Who knows how young you were? Who knows really the unconscious processes that were going on? Okay, so you're never going to get at the core, the real truth, but you can get closer to it. You can not react in the moment. You can say, if you're this young man who's trapped in this pattern, it's a very difficult thing to go, but is it true that she's actually being like that? If I actually step back and analyzed her words, they're totally neutral. She's not being mean or vicious. She's not about to leave me, right? Or she's not betraying me in any way. It's totally neutral, right? And I often go through that process. I've been in a relationship for a long time where I get a little bit upset and angry and I'm blaming her and blah, blah, blah. And I have to go back, like, it takes a couple hours for the microwave to kind of cool down, right? And you go, no way, man. Why does she feel the way she's feeling? Well, it probably comes from me, but I'm totally projecting onto her, right? So just the idea that you are projecting your emotions onto people, just the idea that you're reacting to something that's an illusion, it's a mirage, is liberating enough because it's going to prevent you from doing stupid things. How many times I've had this problem, do you get angry and you send that angry email voicing all of your upset and displeasure, and then 2 hours later you go, shit, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't revealed my vulnerability. I wish I had, I overreacted, right? So the ability to write that email and then put it in the draft folder and never send it. And, I have this thing in my own computer where in my email, that draft folder is getting larger and larger. It's got 12, it's got 20, it's got 80 things in it. That shows me 80 times I have put that thing into the draft folder and I have a degree of control. So.
Yeah, the idea that that you don't have full access to everything that led you to react the way that you did, and two, that to some extent it's an illusion. So you call it attitude, I call it frame of reference. I've given my entire professional life to the idea that frame of reference may be the single most important thing in determining the outcome of your life. So looking at right now in much of the developed world, your zip code is the number one predictor of your future success. So were it your IQ, I could understand that. But the fact that it just is where you happen to grow up, that's really, really distressing to me. And so having worked in the inner cities a lot and seen up close what the problem is, you encounter people with incredible intellect, but as you watch them process the data, they're processing it through a filter. And that filter is what you call attitude. And when it encounters an attitude that isn't helpful, you get an outcome that's like a funhouse mirror. And you're like, what? The way that you're looking at this doesn't make sense in the following way. You have a goal, and the way you're thinking about things, either your goal makes no sense, it won't optimize for fulfillment or joy, or you have a goal that makes sense, and the way that you're parsing the data does not lead you to take actions that will actually move you towards that goal.
Right.
And so it becomes this really distressing question of, okay, somebody gets to adulthood, they have an attitude or a frame of reference that isn't helping them accurately, it isn't helping them process data in a way that will move them towards a useful goal. That's the cleanest, most truthful way to say it. So then the question becomes, what can you do to begin reformulating that attitude, that frame of reference in order to get you where you want to go? Do you think at all about what is the atomized thing that makes up the attitude? For me, it's beliefs. Your frame of reference is a reflection of, I'll call it roughly 25 beliefs that you have. Get those beliefs right, you're A-okay. Get those beliefs wrong, and you've got a real problem. But the atomized thing for me is a belief. What's the atomized version of an attitude for you?
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the beliefs part, but I'm trying to.
Do you want me to explain it? Do you want me to explain it?
Yeah.
All right. So the most important one, so I've actually written down the 25 that I think make this up, but there's one that's really important. It's what I call the only belief that matters, which is that, in fact, you talk about this in your book. Mastery is essentially about this idea that if you put time and energy into getting good at something, you will actually get good at it.
Right.
And that thing has utility in the real world. Now, if you believe that, then you'll pick up the guitar and you'll start practicing.
Right.
You'll sit down at the typewriter and you'll start writing.
Right.
If you don't believe it, it wouldn't make sense to
Right.
pick up a guitar. You're either good at it from birth or you're not. And so why would you bother?
Right.
That one belief will bifurcate your entire life, because you're either going to lean into just the things you think you're already naturally gifted at, and your
Right.
life will be limited by whatever that is, or you will spend a massive amount of time and energy gaining mastery.
Right.
And those two, same person, but those are wildly divergent outcomes.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I don't know, the atomizing, I think I might just basically agree with you. I would maybe say the stories that we tell ourselves, which comes down to the same thing. Because I've discovered in my meditation that the way the brain works is it's continually telling us stories about the world, about ourselves, about the way people are. And I don't mean stories it's literally what I'm saying. It's like constructed like a story. It has a narrative arc to it, right? This is what happened to me. And the story is constructed, and this is the result. And what the story I'm telling myself might not be the correct story at all, right? So being able to understand what really happened, what is actually the story that occurred there, is extremely important. And so you're hitting on the bedrock, which is extremely fundamental, which is, do you believe that you're capable of change? Do you believe that good things happen when you go through a process of learning and taking steps? Do you believe, going back to your belief, that you can actually get out of your patterns? Because you can be fooling yourself. You can be bullshitting. You can be saying, yeah, I kind of do. But deep down inside, you don't really want to do it because, believe it or not, your bad patterns give you a degree of comfort, right? It's something that you know. And to get out of them, you're suddenly thrust into the unknown. And that could be very frightening. So you could be holding on to these bad patterns. So the belief that I can change. I can actually do something different in my life. I can actually recreate myself. I can actually learn things. I can actually rewire my brain, because the brain is incredibly plastic. Even at the age of 40, 50, you can change your career. You can learn new skills. I've reached 60. I'm constantly learning as well. The brain is insanely plastic. Do you believe that? Do you believe that you have the possibility to change yourself, to alter your patterns? That's probably the single most important thing right there. And to get people to believe that, as I said, there's two levels. There's the people who will shake their head, yeah, they'll read mastery, but it won't mean anything to them because they're afraid of the change. They're comfortable with a degree of failure, I hate to say, because if you don't try things, you never have to deal with the responsibility, the pain of failure, right? So you don't really want to change deep down inside. You don't really believe in Tom's number one bedrock belief, right? You're kind of fooling yourself. So it's not a fairy tale. It's not a bunch of a myth that we're creating. It's true that you have the power. The brain, if you just understood this one thing, that the brain is like a landscape. It's like a landscape out in the world that you see where things can be lush and tropical, or they can be completely arid and dead. You create that landscape yourself. You create the brain that you have by the degree of how you're open to experience, by the degree of how much you learn, by the degree of how many different sources of information you take in. You can create this incredibly alive brain that's very creative, imaginative, and how much more fun will your life be if you're open and you let things come in and new ideas come in. So it's up to you. You're the one that's creating your misery. It's creating your patterns. And it comes down to that bedrock one belief that you just mentioned.
I think we touched on it a little bit the last time we spoke. It's an incredibly interesting idea that you feel like the right person to explore, partly because you do take certainly a darker look at life than I do. And for some reason, I find myself completely drawn to that flame of the way that you look at the world, maybe because it's good sort of disconfirming evidence for me. It doesn't just put me in my own loop. But the guy who some people say that, Robert, you shouldn't write these books. This is like evil Machiavellian content. The world is better off not, sort of turning a blind eye to this. Which I heartily disagree with. But for that person to now be touching on the sublime, what drew you to that?
Well, it's I could go on forever about this. I'll try and keep it reasonably short, but I've been interested in this idea for 15, probably 20 years. I don't know, I read an article, I read a book about it a long time ago. Really excited me. And I meant to be my fourth book after I finished War. I started researching it. And then I got distracted by the 50 Cent book that I did. Then came Mastery, and then came Human Nature. And finally I took a breath and said, all right, this is the time for the sublime. It's going to be my next book. And the 18th chapter of The Law of Human Nature is about confronting your mortality. And I talk about the sublime in that chapter. And the idea is that, here's how I explain the sublime. It's kind of like a circle. If you can imagine human life as a circle, social life. To be a human means, in any time period, the culture that we live in creates a circle. And in that circle is a limit to what you're allowed to believe in, what you're allowed to think, your behavior. There are codes and conventions and rules that we all ascribe to. They're not the same as they were in ancient Egypt 3,500 years ago, but back then they had a circle. It was just a different circle, right? Okay, so you're not supposed to think these thoughts. You're not supposed to do this, that. This is the circle that we live in. Just outside that circle is the realm of the sublime. It's something that we're not really ever supposed to think about, or we're not really supposed to ever do. It's something that's filled with a slight transgressive energy, a level of excitement, because deep down inside in human nature, we don't like limits. We rebel against them. We want to be free. Our spirits are yearning to be free. And that sense of these are codes that you have to abide by is very restricting. It feels like a prison almost. So we're inevitably attracted to things outside of that. and that is the realm of the sublime. And it's incredibly exciting. It contains so much energy because in that circle, all of your energy is kind of crushed and compounded inside of you. It's kind of, you have to feel this way, you have to do this. When you let go and you go out, explore outside of it, it's like suddenly you're tapping into something that's in the cosmos. Incredibly energizing. It's what Maslow called a peak experience, right? Okay, so the ultimate form of going beyond that circle is death itself. Death is the ultimate limit, obviously, to our lives. And people who have peered through that door, because the word sublime literally means up to the threshold. That's the Latin. Up to the threshold of a door. So imagine that circle has all these little doors in it, and you're peering through it. This is something that I haven't thought of before, right? The ultimate door is death, right? And people who've peered through that door have had a near-death experience a little bit, to some degree. It changes you. It's like that is the biggest blast of the sublime that you can get. That's the strongest form of the drug imaginable. You no longer look at being alive anymore the same way. You no longer see the trees, the birds, the people that you love in the same way.
Do you think it's universally that people see something better than they did before?
No, it's not true. It's a good point. There have been studies of near-death experiences. I don't remember the percentage, but there is a percentage, the smaller percentage, that has a negative experience. It's very painful and ugly and demonic and hellish. And no, they're not having this. So thank you for bringing that up. That's true. But for most people, it has this effect where, and there are reasons why the people have the hellish view. There are other things going on. That's just not normal. You came very close to death and you're alive. So everything has a different meaning to you, right? Things that you took for granted before no longer have that same sense. And there are other things that go on. Well, anyway, to get to my story here, I wrote that chapter with those ideas in mind. And then 2-3 months later, I came this close to dying myself. So what had been this intellectual abstract argument about near death, sublime, blah, 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 became very real, right? I was in a coma. I was driving my car. If my girlfriend hadn't stopped, made me pull over, if the medics hadn't come quickly, I would have permanent brain damage or I would be dead. I came very close. I was in a coma. I didn't have like visions of angels, etc., and all the other things that people sometimes claim they have. But I had some very strange things, some feelings in my body that, not as often anymore, but I still sometimes get a feeling that my bones were kind of melting from the inside.
Whoa.
There was kind of like a sort of dissolving. What was solid about me was dissolving, right? And then a sense of it's only for a brief second, and sometimes I'm not even sure if it's true or not, but I had an image of me up above looking down, and I had died and people were talking about me, right? I'm not sure whether my brain in memory is playing a trick on me, but I seem to have that recollection. Anyway, it became very real to me, this subject, right? And so now it wasn't just this intellectual thing about writing a book about the sublime. It was very, very real. The last thing I'll say is, when I had originally planned the book back in 2005 or so, I was going to be jetting off to Tierra del Fuego to see, the South Pole. I was going to go swimming with dolphins in the Caribbean. I was going to be going on top of, Mount Everest. I don't know, whatever, that kind of stuff, having sublime experiences. Obviously, I had a stroke. I can't even really walk outside my house and take a normal hike. I can barely walk a few blocks. I can't do any of these things, right? So what I've had to discover is, because I can only write a book if I'm in the mood of the book, right? So I have to be feeling sublime to write the book. I have to find it in everyday things. I have to find it in the little garden in my house. I have to find it in the cats in my house, in my girlfriend, and in her eyes, looking outside my window, in the books that I'm reading. I have to suck the sublime out of every little trivial little affair that goes on in my life. And putting that in the book, I think so if I had written that other book, people would go, oh, that's great, but this kind of rich white guy, he's able to fly off here. That has nothing to do with my life. I'm living as restricted of a life as you can imagine. Although there are people much more restricted than me, but pretty damn restricted. And yet I'm able to find this in my daily life. If I can find it, there's no barrier for other people, no matter if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's. The world is sublime, and it's all around you, and you don't have to go to Tierra del Fuego to experience that.
I want to get more into what the sublime is actually. So I honestly, it's a word that I never really thought of.
Okay.
I feel like I have an intuitive understanding that it's something sort of surprising and wonderful, but with a not sort of big amplitude's the wrong word, but there's something relaxed about it, like a warm bath is sublime, you know, but this idea of it being a threshold, something that you're seeing beyond into something new, that's a new take on it for me, which is far more interesting.
Well, it's the sublime is not a warm bath, quite the opposite. It's a mix of pleasure and pain. It's a mix of two opposing emotions, a sense of fear and a sense of awe, almost consecutively or at the same time, right? So if you go to see a horror movie or you're on a roller coaster, the excitement comes from the fact that you feel kind of at risk, that there's sort of danger there, but you're safe, right? So you're feeling two things at the same time, kind of anxiety and kind of about the pleasure that you're actually not being threatened. So neuroscientists have shown that the mixing of two sort of contrary emotions creates an incredible intensity of affect, much more than just a single emotion. So the quintessential experience of the sublime, when it was first written about in the 18th century, was climbing the Alps, the Matterhorn, or wherever it was, right? And you got a sense of how small you were, how, you know, you could die very easily if there's an avalanche, and how, you know, how fragile you were in the face of this immensity. And yet the awesomeness of it, the beauty of it was overwhelming. And so they were fascinated with this idea of being able to feel these two contrary emotions at the same time. So it's not at all a warm bath. I can only, the sublime is an experience. It's something hard to put into words. So Robert's trying to write a book about it. Yeah, I know. Believe me, I know. But let me give you an idea. Give me one example of something that is so insanely sublime that you can't ever think the same about the world after you contemplate this. Okay? So here you and I are sitting here talking in this incredibly high-tech, amazing house with all the insane technology around us. All right, consider this. Our planet's some 4 billion years old. Around 3.1 billion years, in some little bit of pond, some kind of organic life began. We don't know how or why or what triggered it, although scientists are getting closer. Some form of single-celled bacteria self-created itself out of chemicals that came from other planets, right? Carbon, etc. Okay? This single-celled bacteria dominated the planet for billions of years. It was the only form of life, right? Okay. And then sometime in the past, I've forgotten the exact time frame in my mind. It's in my book. The first multicellular creature was created. Maybe that was 2 billion years ago or so. Okay. And it was a complete freak accident. One piece of bacteria swallowed another bacteria and created a multicellular organism. It's only happened once in the history of our planet. Once. Contemplate that. We know that because there's only one line of DNA that we can trace back to the first time that it happened. There's not a second line of DNA, only one. So it happened once. It's never happened again. It was a freakish example. If that hadn't happened, forget everything else that occurred on this planet. Okay, but it did happen. Okay, so these are called bottlenecks. Certain things occurred that created evolution to go in a certain direction, and they could have occurred differently. I'll skip to 60 million years ago when an asteroid the size of New York City hit Earth, hit in the Yucatan Peninsula, and it was the most insane explosion ever, like the equivalent of all the nuclear bombs on our planet. It destroyed the dinosaurs. It destroyed 99% of the life on this planet, right? It was the Holocaust of all Holocausts. And this meteor almost missed the Earth asteroid. Very easily could have missed the planet, because think of the emptiness of space and the smallness of Earth. It was a freak accident. If that hadn't happened, dinosaurs would still be walking around here. Mammals would have never emerged as the dominant creature. I'll skip to 80,000 years ago. Humans at that point, there were only like 10,000 humans left on the planet. If one single virus, I'm talking about Homo sapiens, one single virus would have wiped us out. At that point, we were extremely vulnerable. If that number had gotten down further, anything could have wiped us out, right? A change in climate, etc. Okay, if that had happened, we wouldn't be here, and Neanderthals would have probably taken over the planet, and who knows what that would look like right now, okay? Then think of your own parents and how unlikely was their ever meeting, and the fate that happened there. If they hadn't met, Tom wouldn't be here, or you'd be somebody else, right? There are 70,000 generations, more or less, going into you going back to the first Homo sapien, all right? That one-time encounter between you and your parents multiplied by 70,000 chance encounters. So to bring us to the present, that you and I are sitting here together in this office with all this stuff around us, it's you and it's me, the odds against it are so unbelievably astronomical that you can't even compute. So what does that make you think about what's happening to you right now? If you really contemplate it, it will alter how you think about everything. Everything you see around you, the plants, the animals, they didn't have to be that way. It's extremely unlikely. It's a weird world that we live in, right? So that is an example of a sublime thought. It's a little bit scary because it has to do with annihilation, Holocaust, deaths, but it's also an awesome thought about the fact that you're just alive. So that's sort of, and it's something I went into in the second chapter of my book.
I find this so interesting. So how do we make use of that? And why is it so useful?
Well, the reason it's so useful, and this is what I just did in my third chapter, is it's wired into our nature. So a lot of things are wired that aren't so good that we could talk about, but the need for transcendent experiences, the need to be taken out of ourselves, which is the source of all of our religious, all of our spiritual beliefs, and all of the art that we create, almost everything that we humans do, goes back to our earliest ancestors, right? And being the first conscious beings on this planet, conscious in the way that our brains are conscious, they looked at this world and they saw things. They go, I'm talking about Aborigines in Australia. How did this world happen? How did this occur? How could it be that there are stars and plants and kangaroos? It's insane. And they had these kind of sublime thoughts, and out of that they created gods and spirits and all sorts of forces. Okay? But that awesome feeling, that feeling of why are things the way they are? Why is there something and not nothing, is very much wired into our nature. And to deny it is very painful. And so what I talk about in the book is, if you're not going after the sublime, you're going to go after the false sublime. And the false sublime will be drugs. It'll be alcohol. It'll be joining some kind of ugly political campaign in which you get all your yayas out and you feel angry and violent and blah, 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 right? On and on and on. It could be porn, online porn, etc. The kind of drugs that take you outside of yourself but are kind of ugly, and they're addicting, and they're not liberating. So if you're not going after this, you're going to find it in some other way, and it's not going to be healthy. And you want this in your life because it gives you a kind of peace, and it gives you a scale of priorities. If the Big Bang occurred some 13, 14 billion years ago and started this whole thing off, what does my little 80, 90 years of existence mean? This is like a flash. It's like a pop of a popcorn in the eternity of time. It doesn't mean anything. It's so small. So why does it matter? So it's calming, actually. It's calming you down. It's making you think the things that are happening right now aren't as big as I think they are. So you want this in your life. Then you asked me, how do you get it? Is that your question?
Yeah. So as you were explaining it, I thought, some people I think are going to brush it off. Maybe they don't stop to really let that hit them. And so when you were talking, I thought, okay, is this why? So I've never done psychedelics, but I have a feeling